Thank you. I'll now begin the questions by recognizing myself. Mr. Chairman, Director, you referred to the IG report, and Mr. Collins and I both referred to it. And that report found considerable mistakes and considerable bad practices in the incident reviewed in those FISA warrant applications, correct?
Correct. Okay.
And you understand that, and you're going to do everything you can to correct that. I think we all know that. Is it correct that report also found that there was no evidence whatsoever that the mistakes that the FBI made, or that the people in the FBI made, had any political motive against the president or anyone else?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would just refer you to the report itself. Obviously, the Inspector General put a lot of hard work into that investigation. I think 1 million something documents, 170 interviews, very thorough, very independent, 500 pages report. And so I would prefer to rely on his description of what he found. He made some very specific findings on that, both about what he found and, as Mr. Chairman, as to what he did not find.
Okay. Now, recent reporting suggests that the president plans to seek payback against those individuals he believes crossed him during the impeachment proceedings. I'm sorry to have to ask, has the president, the attorney general, or any other administration official asked the FBI to open an investigation into Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, John Bolton, or any member of Congress?
Mr. Chairman, I have assured the Congress, and I can assure the Congress today, that the FBI will only open investigations based on the facts and the law and proper predication.
I understand that. And I assume that it is correct that neither the President, the Attorney General, or any other administration official has asked the FBI to open improper political investigation.
And no one has asked me to open an investigation based on anything other than the facts, the law, and proper predication.
Thank you. What reporting mechanisms are available for FBI officials and employees to report concerns if they believe the agency or they are being asked to pursue politically motivated investigations?
Well, there are a number of avenues that an employee who is troubled by, any number of things. There are whistleblower provisions. They have the ability to go up their supervisory chain. We have a number of mechanisms independent of their supervisory chain inside the organization. And then under certain circumstances, there are, of course, reporting mechanisms, I think, even to Congress.
Okay, and of course, there are provisions designed to protect the anonymity of whistleblowers so that they can't be retaliated against.
Again, it depends on the specific vehicle, but there are a number of provisions that deal with protecting whistleblowers, which I think is important.
There's been a lot of confusion in the public about the Bureau's role in conducting background checks for Senate-confirmed appointments, including judicial nominees. My understanding is that when conducting these background checks, the FBI is restricted to the scope and subject matter requested by the client agency. In the case of Justice Kavanaugh's appointment, I understand that the client agency was the White House, specifically the White House counsel's office. So, yes or no, if the White House had directed the FBI to interview some witnesses but not others, or if they had told you to complete the process by a certain date, would the FBI have followed that request?
If the Senate or the Congress wants the scope to be broader, then they should direct that request to the adjudicating agency.
Very good. Thank you very much. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Collins, for his questioning.
I'd heard this before we actually started this majority chairmanship, that we were going to reinvestigate the Kavanaugh here. It took almost 12 months, 13 months to get there, but we started that process this morning. It's interesting that the chairman couldn't let it go. Don't want to have a hearing about it, but he'll get it in right now. Again, just the drive-bys of this committee still just amaze me. Let's go back to something that's actually here for you to discuss. Under the criminal wiretap statute, an agent must exhaust other feasible options before seeking a wiretap to a subject, meaning the agent must attempt to seek evidence in less intrusive manner first. assuming it's safe to do so. FISA also requires, albeit not as stringently, that the information sought cannot be obtained through normal investigative techniques. Are you aware whether agents sought to interview Carter Page before seeking a FISA on him?
Congressman, I would just, as to the facts of the Inspector General's report, I would refer to the report itself. I'm very sensitive about not trying to characterize or summarize his findings, just like I don't like it when people do it to my investigations.
And I appreciate it, but let's take it from just a step away from the investigation itself. Should they have tried any other means before seeking a FISA against Carter Page? And this would be, or Joe Smith, whatever you want to call it. Proper procedure here should be that they have to go through less intrusive means other than going straight to a FISA issue. Would that not be proper procedure?
I think every investigative decision, including the decision about when to seek a FISA wiretap, has to follow specific procedures and safeguards, and it's fact-dependent and fact-specific based on a whole slew of circumstances. So it's hard for me to answer one hypothetical in that regard.
Fact-dependent is also, facts in different cases also don't give you a carte blanche to just bypass rules that are set in place for specific stuff like that.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I do not think anyone has carte blanche to bypass rules, and I intend to make it painfully clear that that would not be acceptable in the FBI today.
And I appreciate that. And I think that's one of the things that, in discussing this, I do believe that you have set forth and attempted to find ways to reassume trust in the agencies involved here. And I appreciate that. In fact, I spoke about it in my opening statement. I talked about how we come to this part. And most people forget that the reason that we have a FISA court now was because of the abuses when left uncontrolled outside of FISA. And I understand on my side and probably on the Democratic side as well, there's a lot of concern about the FISA process, the FISA court. There's a lot of us who have concerns about it in the secretness of it and the way it goes about. But we also have to remember where it came from to start with. It came out of a time in which these agencies had problems. They came together with the Pike and church committees to actually find a solution, because left unregulated, we also see what happens there as well. The problem is now that we have found it at least to be abused or had problems under a regulated system. So the question is not necessarily, could we do a new committee to say, okay, let's look at this from a wholesale perspective, but more specific questions from your perspective. If you're looking at changing FISA, not the issues that you've talked about and I've agreed upon that need to be re-upped, but in macro level, how can we restore, and you and I have talked about this, how do we macro level restore trust in the American people, in the agencies and in the intelligence agencies? Are there things that should we believe top level officials in the intelligence community can now be trusted to self-police?
I believe the American people can have confidence in the intelligence community as I sit here today. I think there are a number of things that the Inspector General's report identified that should be changed and can be changed and need to be improved, and we've accepted and agreed with every single one of those, but I've gone above and beyond. And so I can't go through my entire list of 40 plus corrective actions here, but they're all designed to improve the process, to improve accountability internally, to improve the rigor, the discipline, the safeguards that exist for that very, very important tool that we rely on every day to keep people all over this country safe.
And I appreciate that, and I think sometimes that's missing in the rhetoric and the discussion here, that you and the Attorney General both have taken corrective action. Now, some of us may not agree they went far enough. We don't believe that maybe some were not held accountable to a different standard. The euphemistic ways it was discussed in the Horowitz report of mistakes, and I think most Americans don't understand that concept, especially when you're dealing with their civil liberties. One of the issues that has been coming up in this is I'm concerned that many of the FISC, and we'll go to the FISA court here, amicus attorneys appear either conflicted or have taken active positions hostile to, frankly, Republican positions. Why should we trust, again, there's some discussion here, why should we trust amicus attorneys to impartially present a case to the court in favor of civil liberties interests while ignoring affiliations of the surveillance target or political affiliations or even the affiliation with administration seeking the warrant? Do you, and just as a question for you, do you trust the amicus attorneys to fairly present cases to court? Because that's a big discussion here on is civil liberties actually being protected in a way now into the court system, in the FISA court?
Well, the whole amicus process is the purview of the FISA court itself, and I think it's a mechanism that can, in the right circumstances, be useful as the law was changed, I think, in 2010 to clarify for novel issues of law. We do lots and lots and lots of FISAs that don't raise any remotely controversial issues for any member of this committee all the time, and they're incredibly important. So I would be very leery of entertaining any kind of change that would have all kinds of unintended consequences. We do a lot with FISA to protect this country from the terrorist threat. And as somebody who lived through 9/11 in the FBI building itself, and in my prior DOJ tenure, worked very closely on the 9/11 related investigations, met with the families and everything else, I can assure the members of this committee that we need those FISA authorities. We need the agility to stay ahead of the threat, or we're all going to regret it.
And I think you're right in that. The question comes in the bigger scope of what this committee is having to deal with, and other parts of this committee will have to deal with as well, because the priority of that court comes under this jurisdiction, is the perception now that it has become a problematic process, and that you can have 100 very proper, or 99 very proper, non, as you said, unique system, but that one or two, especially when they have the emphasis that they've had in the last 3 to 4 years, does cause a perception issue. And the perception issue is it was a politically motivated event, there was a bias in the process, and no matter how euphemistically the Horowitz report wanted to describe it, there was a problem. I do want to come back to something, though. Did the FBI conduct a Woods review on the Carter Page FISA applications?
Well, again, I would refer you to the Inspector General's report. I don't want to try to characterize exactly what he said about the Woods process in the Carter Page.
But in all due respect, from your agency, you would have seen and have access to these records. And so I'm asking a more of a direct question here. Did the FBI conduct a Woods review on the Carter Page FISA application? I'm not asking for the Horowitz report. I'm asking a specific question about this issue.
We have done significant reviews of the materials underlying the Carter Page FISA applications, including a number of steps that we've taken lately to, in effect, claw back the information that was collected under those applications.
And I'm not to push it, but so is that a yes? Was a Woods review done on the Carter Page FISA application?
We've reviewed the Woods file underlying the Carter Page applications.
Okay, so there was a review what are the findings of that you can share?
Again, I don't think there's any findings that I can share here today beyond the findings that are in the Inspector General's report.
Okay, so we'll pass this. So you've looked at this. You're now saying that you have looked at the Woods review process on this FISA application. Is there concerns that have been brought out? What would be your concerns as the director of the FBI that this would not happen again, especially finding the issues that were found or the lack of issues in the Woods review that goes before this FISA application under Carter Page? This is becoming a setup. So if you have looked at it, how is that compatible with what should have happened, and why have more processes or changes not taken place?
Well, I think a number of the 40-plus corrective actions that I've already directed go to ensuring the rigor and discipline of the Woods process.
Knowing exactly what you said there, let me ask you this, the final and directed question on 2 points here. Number one, knowing what you know because you have looked over the Woods review process for the Carter Page, do you think that it was a properly done investigation, especially given the Woods review of this application to the FISA court? This is you. I'm not talking about the Horowitz report.
I think the report describes conduct that is unacceptable and unrepresentative of the FBI as an institution, and that includes, in a number of respects, ways in which those particular applications were handled.
So you're saying that you agree on that. One last question. Have there been any determination who leaked the Page FISA to the press?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Has there been any determination, or have you determined who leaked the Page FISA to the press?
I don't have anything I can share on that.
Could you share in a classified setting?
No, I don't think so.
So we've not determined it. Have we looked?
Again, I can't speak to specific leak investigations or anything of that sort here or otherwise.
Are we saying there's an ongoing investigation to that?
No, I'm not saying that.
I yield back. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate it.
You've, of course, also already referred to the review of the so-called Crossfire hurricane investigation by Inspector General, excuse me, Michael Horowitz. And as you know, the Inspector General reported serious flaws and overreach by the FBI in the application process to surveil Carter Page, who at the time was a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. While the review did not conclude that your predecessor or any of his agents were politically motivated, the way that they went about obtaining these FISA warrants was at the time and continues to be deeply concerning to many people. Excuse me. Given that there's an election less than a year away, it seems to me that significant changes need to occur to address past FISA application abuses by the FBI, and you've referred to them to some degree already. What are some of the changes that you're implementing that will help to ensure that politically motivated agencies and attorneys are unable to pursue FISA applications with unverified, uncorroborated, or even downright false information?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question. I, too, was deeply concerned by what I read in the Inspector General's report. And as I've said, I consider it to have described conduct that I consider unacceptable and unrepresentative of the FBI that I know. Now, there are a number of things that I think go to addressing those concerns. And I'll just name a few of them here. I will say it starts with tone at the top. I have been communicating unambiguously in field office after field office, headquarters division after headquarters division, that how we do what we do matters. That the American people expect the FBI not just to get to the right result, but to go about it in the right way. And so I've been pounding process, process, process everywhere I go, and I've put in place a whole new leadership team that is helping me amplify that message. Second, we've put in place a whole number of, and they get kind of technical, but a whole number of process and policy changes that go both to our use of FISA, but also to our use of things like confidential human sources and those kind of things, and how those get incorporated into the FISA process. We put in place new training. I put in place last summer, actually over 18 months ago, a training that did not exist before, all focused on not just avoiding bias, but avoiding even the appearance of bias. And I started, and this is important, I started by requiring all the top people. It's not the way government usually works. I started by requiring everybody at the top of the house, all 200 and plus SES folks in the Bureau, to come in to Quantico for a full day to get coached on that by judges, the Inspector General, and others, trying to set, again, the tone, the idea that it starts at the top. I've put in place training that didn't exist before, policies that didn't exist before, processes that didn't exist before, oversight that didn't exist before, and where there are people who are still left, most of whom are effectively at the line level, or at least were at the time of the Inspector General report, they've been referred to our Office of Professional Responsibility, which is our disciplinary arm.
Thank you, Mr. Director. I'd like to get one more question and hopefully get you time to answer it. Mr. Director, the President signed into law the Fix Nix Act, and I think you mentioned that earlier.
And neo-Nazis, which we all saw in Charlottesville, and we knew there were not fine people on both sides. That has been really harmful to a lot of people in this country who saw that and have seen the harm that the communists and the Nazis and the Klan have done over the years to Jews, African Americans, and others.
Mr. Gohmert.
Thank you, Director Wray. Thank you for being here. I wish I had enough time to address some of the things the chairman said that needed correcting, but questioning you is too important. First of all, have you ever signed an application for a warrant or an affidavit in support of an application for a warrant yourself?
I've signed right now, as FBI director, I signed the certifications for FISA applications, for FISA warrants, if that's what you're talking about. I'm not sure if that's what...
Do you ever read them before you sign them?
Of course.
All right, well, Mr. Rosenstein would not admit ever reading any of the things he signed, especially with regard to FISA applications, so that concerned me greatly. I'm glad to hear you do. Now, there's a report that Mr. Kleinsmith that altered information that was supplied to the FISA court, that he was allowed to resign. Is that accurate?
Well, Mr. Kleinsmith is no longer with the FBI, and I don't think I can comment on a specific personnel matter beyond that.
Okay, well, let me tell
as we
you,
sit here right now.
when you have an FBI agent, and you don't need to defend the 37,000 employees, they're not being questioned here. And I can tell you, as a former felony judge, I had FBI agents come to me. They would never have dreamed of lying in an affidavit or changing information to misrepresent the facts to me or any other judge. There are people across the country whose reputations have been sullied by the improper, or I believe you said unacceptable and unrepresentative actions at the FBI here in Washington, D.C. They're not under attack, but the reputation of the FBI has been so sullied. And we all hope that when you became director, you were going to help fix that. But I can tell you, I know that you wouldn't be in this position if you didn't believe that there was deterrent effect in punishment. That's what law enforcement is engaged in, at least part of the job. So when you have somebody that violates American civil rights and commits a fraud upon the FISA court, and the court doesn't do anything but appoint somebody that's friendly to the position of the fraud as an amicus, then we continue to have questions not only about what needs to be done to fix FISA, but if we ought to go back to the way it was before the 70s. So this is serious. So when you have an FBI agent, and surely you're aware, to commit a fraud upon a FISA court or any court, or to misrepresent facts in something that is sworn, those can involve crimes. And this guy's not even fired, and there's no indication he's going to be prosecuted. I know you're saying it's a personnel matter, so I can't get into it, but I'm telling you, the FBI reputation here in Washington cannot be cleaned up until there are people that are held to account for the unacceptable actions here in Washington. And letting somebody resign sends a message to anybody else that wants to get political active and use their job at the FBI to further a political will. The message to them is, well, if I get caught, I'll be asked to go take a better paying job somewhere else. Great punishment, no deterrence, and business goes on as usual. We needed an FBI director that would clean this mess up so America could feel good about it. And I can tell you, when you come in and say, it's a personnel matter, can't really deal with it or talk about it, you're not helping improve the reputation. I want to bring up another matter. You know about 302s. The FBI is about the last law enforcement agency or department in the country that doesn't video or audio tape statements that are made. And they've been allowed to do that because they have such a great reputation, or did. But now that we've seen 302s get changed, different opinions, what did he say, what did he not say, especially with General Flynn, many of us are wondering if it isn't time, if not bringing the FBI into the 21st century, at least into the last half of the 20th century, and start having FBI agents record statements by people that are being questioned by FBI agents to help the FBI get their reputation back. I mean, some of the justices of the peace will look for that. Would you consider supporting the recording of statements to FBI agents rather than just a written summary that can be changed later by an FBI agent?
Well, Congressman, there are certain circumstances under which statements are currently recorded already at the FBI, and that is a change. I think this is a subject that requires longer discussion, but I'd be happy to have my staff follow back up with you. As to the question of the FBI's reputation and candor to the court, I don't want to let this time expire without telling you how strongly I feel about candor to the court. I've been a prosecutor, I've been a defense attorney, I've been an assistant attorney general, I've been an FBI director, and to me, candor to the court is sacrosanct. And I don't think there's anybody in the FBI that is belaboring under the misimpression that I think it is okay to mislead a court. Now, the vast majority of the senior people involved in the investigation at issue here are gone from the FBI. Of those who are left,
Majority. So there are people there still.
Time of the gentleman has
if I could just
No, we're
finish my
not up
answer.
to 9 minutes.
And none in the national.
Please let him answer the question.
And none in the national
the
security
director,
branch.
the witness may answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The people who are left were largely line-level people at the time of the matter in question. Those people have all been referred to our disciplinary arm. And the reason I'm not engaging with you on a specific personnel matter is because my commitment to ensuring proper accountability ensures that even that is done by the book. And by the book, to me, does not include discussing a pending personnel issue in this hearing. So I respect the reason for your question. I share your passion, both about the reputation of the FBI and about the importance of candor to the court.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in your confirmation proceeding, you were asked a question in the Senate if you believed that the investigation into the Russian 2016 election interference was a witch hunt, and under what many would have felt would be pressure to say, to equivocate in some way, you came right out and you said that no, you did not believe that it was a witch hunt. And ever since then, you have conducted yourself as FBI director in that same honest and forthright way. And that's a refreshing that's a refreshing conduct that you have exemplified in the midst of a anti-institutionalist Trump administration, which has applied pressure to you to conform, just like most others have conformed to its anti-institutionalism. And you have protected the FBI. And isn't it a fact that there was no finding in the IG report that the FBI committed a fraud upon the FISA court? Isn't that true?
Well, Congressman, I want to be consistent in the way I'm answering everyone's questions. As to the Inspector General's report, he put an enormous amount of work, over 1 million documents, 107 interviews, and I just really don't want to be characterizing his findings. He made very specific findings, both about what he found and about what he did not find in that report.
The FBI committed a fraud on the FISA court, and I just don't read the report to say that. Now, he did identify some deficiencies in the warrant reauthorization application process, and I think you'll probably find those kinds of shortcomings in every law enforcement agency in America. If you look carefully enough, you'll find some of that going on. But I'm convinced that you have made it clear that no cutting of corners, no taking the easy way out, do it the hard way. And I expect that from the FBI. And so I want to thank you for your conduct in protecting the FBI as an institution. It's not a rogue agency out there hurting people.
It didn't seem to me that you had quite the same outrage in your response letter to Inspector General Horowitz, December 6, 2019. You wrote a letter. It's the last few pages of Mr. Horowitz's report. In the third sentence of that letter, you said this: the report's findings and recommendations represent constructive criticism that will make us stronger as an organization. Constructive criticism that will make us stronger. Director, you know what we all know on July 31st, 2016, the FBI opened an investigation, spied on 4 American citizens associated with the presidential campaign. The FBI went to the FISA court and lied to the court 17 times. The FBI took the dossier, the now famous dossier, to the FISA court and didn't tell the court. You just talked about candor to the court. They didn't tell the court the guy who wrote it was desperate, had communicated to the Justice Department he was desperate to stop Trump. Didn't tell the guy who wrote it, Mr. Steele, was paid by the Clinton campaign to put the document together. And when all that's pointed out to you in a 400-page report, you say, thanks for the constructive criticism. 400-page report that says there were 51 assertions the top people at the FBI made to the court that weren't backed up, that weren't supported at all, and it's called constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is when your grade school teacher tells you study more for the spelling test. Constructive criticism is when one of my colleagues says, hey, Jim, you should have asked your questions different last week in a hearing. That's constructive criticism. Here's what Mr. Horowitz said. Here's what the Inspector General said. So many basic and fundamental errors were made by 3 separate hand-picked teams on one of the most sensitive FBI investigations that was briefed to the highest levels in the FBI. Maybe more importantly, here's what Judge Collier wrote. She said this in her public order: the frequency with which representations made by FBI personnel turned out to be unsupported or contradicted by information in their possession and with which they withheld information detrimental to their case calls into question whether information contained in other FBI applications is reliable. Put that in plain English, that's they gave so much wrong information here. How are we supposed to trust any other representations made to the court? Even Jim Comey on December 17th said something I never thought I'd hear Jim Comey say. He said, I was wrong. We were overconfident. So I'm a little concerned. I appreciate what you're saying today, that this is unacceptable. I appreciate what you said a little just to Mr. Gomer's questions about candor to the court. But that's not, I mean, what took place in this report is way past constructive criticism. This was a major royal screw up. This is way past constructive criticism.
I'm sorry, is there a question?
There is.
What's the question?
I'm concerned you're not taking this seriously enough. Are you taking it seriously enough, Director Wray?
I think I have demonstrated unambiguously that I take this very seriously. At the same time that the letter that you read occurred, I communicated in no uncertain terms to my leadership team and to the entire FBI workforce that I consider the Inspector General's report to have described conduct that I consider unacceptable.
So it was more than
unacceptable and unrepresentative of who we are as an institution.
Why didn't you write that? Why didn't you write that in the initial? This is the first. It's the last 10 pages of this report.
I addressed the letter because I think the letter, to me,
let me point out
describes the. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let me just point out one of the things you said. One of the recommendations that Mr. Horowitz says is if you're going to do a headquarters special, if you're going to pull this from the field offices, run an investigation out of the headquarters on a sensitive investigative matter, he said you should have some proper protocols in place, some checks and balances. And you said, we accept this recommendation. We got to be careful about doing these headquarters specials, which is what the mid-year exam was, what Crossfire Hurricane was. It was run by the top people at the FBI. And as you rightly say, they're all gone. But one of the recommendations that you say you're going to do to deal with this concern, you said we're going to require FBI Deputy Director approval prior to opening any FBI headquarters sensitive investigative matter. Well, Shazam, you know what that means? That means Andy McCabe had to sign off on it. Well, isn't that how we got here to begin with? Andy McCabe has to sign off on it, so now the Deputy Director has to sign off on it if you're going to run an investigation out of headquarters and pull it from the field office? Is that really going to solve this problem?
That's not the complete recommendation or corrective action.
I'm reading it right here.
No, let me, if I may.
I'm reading it. I'm just reading what you wrote, requiring FBI Deputy Director approval prior to opening any FBI headquarters sensitive investigative matter.
The corrective action that we put in place on that particular issue involved a number of things. One, to communicate to the field that only in the rarest of circumstances, which was not communicated before, should any investigation, sensitive investigation, be conducted out of headquarters. One. Two, that in addition to requiring Deputy Director sign-off for those rare circumstances where that strong presumption would be rebutted, that it not only required sign-off by the Deputy Director, but also by the affected field offices. And that's a difference. That's what's different. So you couldn't have some small group of people at headquarters making the determination that, oh, that this is an exception. Now, the field offices that would otherwise be the presumptive offices to run those investigations, their leadership have to be involved in the discussion so that people can make sure that any decision to do this.
Who makes the final?
Gentleman's time has expired.
Director Wray, the FBI must put restrictions in place to prevent an administration, regardless of party, from using the FBI for political purposes. If you do not act to expose past abuses by the FBI, I believe it will be very difficult to receive congressional support for your priorities like FISA or preventing online platforms from blocking information from law enforcement. And I yield back.
Given where this hearing started and where I think it's going as it relates to the issue of FISA abuse, I'm going to ask you about this. I want to give you an opportunity to hopefully answer these questions once and for all so that the rest of your testimony can be properly directed. It seems like some of my Democratic colleagues, because this FISA process was initiated during the Obama administration, that they want to focus on the fact that there was no abuse of the FISA process or that that abuse was not politically motivated. It started with Chairman Nadler. The very first question to you was trying to establish that the Inspector General found no evidence of political motive or bias against the president, and you responded that the Inspector General's report speaks for itself. So does the Inspector General. And Inspector General Horowitz on December 11th before the Senate Judiciary Committee said this, quote, "On the FISA side, we found, as you noted, a lack of documentary or testimonial evidence about intentionality, but we also noted the lack of satisfactory explanations and, in fact, leave open the possibility that for the reasons you indicated, it is unclear what the motivations were. On the one hand, gross incompetence, negligence. On the other hand, intentionality, and everywhere in between," end quote. Just because no FBI agent tells the Inspector General, I admit I'm biased and politically motivated against President Trump, doesn't mean there isn't overwhelming evidence of bias and political motivation in the record. To use just one example, an FBI lawyer involved intimately in this FISA process against a Trump campaign associate, Carter Page, sent a number of texts in and around the election of President Trump. Here are a few of them. "The crazies finally won." Another one. "This is the Tea Party on steroids." Another one. "Pence is stupid." Another text that he sent. "I just can't imagine the systematic disassembly of the process, the progress we've made over the last 8 years. And finally, when asked whether he intended to keep working during the Trump administration, he said, quote, "Viva la resistance." Regardless of what that FBI lawyer admitted, do you see evidence of political bias or motivation against President Trump in those text messages?
Well, I would just say, Congressman, as I've said before, that I consider the report to have described conduct that I consider unacceptable and unrepresentative of who we are as an institution. I'm not going to comment on specific people's conduct for a variety of reasons, but I will say that political bias has no place in today's FBI.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'm going to ask you to comment on someone's specific conduct, because that very same FBI agent is the one the Inspector General found in his report was the one that tampered with evidence by counterfeiting an email from an intelligence agency to illegally continue surveillance of a Trump campaign associate. That's what happened, right, Director?
Again, I would just refer you to the report.
Well, the report acknowledges that. So does the Department of Justice and the FISA court. They acknowledge that this was illegal surveillance with respect to at least several of these FISA applications because there was not probable cause or proper predication, correct?
Right.
So to the point of one of my Democratic colleagues that there was no fraud on the court, illegal surveillance and changing evidence to conduct illegal surveillance is the very definition of fraud on the court, is it not?
Well, I certainly think it describes conduct that's utterly unacceptable.
And it's what took place here.
Well, again, I refer to the report. We have accepted, and I've been very clear about this, we've accepted every finding in the Inspector General's report, including some that are extremely painful to us as an institution.
And I appreciate it, Director Wray. I love the FBI. You know my background. I know what you're trying to do. I know the difficult position that you're in. I think the record is clear. I remain convinced that the prior administration weaponized the FBI for political motivation and purposes. I just wonder whether or not you're going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle. I truly know that your motivations are to do that. I wish you the best of luck. I yield back.
Director, are the Russians interfering in our election right now?
Well, I don't think we've seen any ongoing efforts to target election infrastructure like we did in 2016.
Does the FBI see the Russians amplifying content of certain campaigns in the 2020 election? Are other countries also capable of doing that or are doing that right now? Director, you're sitting in the same chair that Director Mueller testified to this committee from. He laid out a number of instances of obstruction of justice in his report, but also cited a DOJ policy that prevents a sitting president from being indicted. Are you able to even start an investigation, or would you have to wait until the president left office? Do you understand the question? If you had an allegation of wrongdoing, do you see that DOJ policy as limiting you from even conducting an investigation while the person is in office?
I'd have to give that more thought. I don't have an answer sitting here right now.
Thank you.
We've talked a bit about this order from Judge Collier from December 17th of 2019. In particular, a couple of references she makes that FBI personnel provided information which was unsupported or contradicted by information in their possession, and also several instances in which the FBI personnel withheld from the National Security Division of DOJ information in their possession, which was detrimental to their case in their presentations to the FISA court. In particular, she expands specifically on what some of those were. The fact that there was allegations that Carter Page had met with two different Russians in Russia in July of 2016, even though Page said he had never met them. That was never included, this kind of exculpatory information. Nor did they talk about the actual origins of the information in their that they were relying on. You've said repeatedly today that that conduct was unacceptable. And I'm trying to determine in my mind whether you find some distinction between unacceptable and whether there was any kind of criminal conduct on the part of these people who were giving effectively sworn testimony by signing these sworn affidavits to the court and either altering evidence or failing to disclose evidence that was exculpatory as required. Do you find anything criminal in their conduct?
Well, I think each case depends on the facts of the specific individual, right? So when you start talking about criminal liability, there's always a question of the level of intent, the mens rea, right? And so whether or not the particular individual knowingly misled somebody, that might be different from somebody who made a mistake and omitted some information. Either way, the reason I use the word unacceptable is I'm not trying to sort of split hairs or engage in semantics. What I'm saying is I hold the men and women of the FBI to a heck of a lot higher standard than not violating the criminal law. I expect the men and women of the FBI to be the best of the best and to do everything by the book, and which is why in speech after speech, in every field office and every headquarters division, the first topic I raise is the importance of not just getting to the right result, but rather letting the process be followed and ensure that the way we do what we do defines the FBI's brand way more than whether or not we're successful in a particular investigation. And I specifically have been raising, and this goes all the way back to my first few months as director, the importance of making sure that the judges who sign our warrants can trust our work, That's not something that I started saying in response to this report. I've been hitting that theme since the outset because it's so important to me, having been not just a prosecutor but a defense attorney. And to me, it's at the very heart of who I am as a professional and what I expect of our people, the candor to the court.
I get that. So what you're talking about is ethical actions, regardless of what the criminal liability may or exposure may be because of culpable mental state. I get that. And I think we could have a philosophical debate of whether criminal law is reflective of the morality of our culture and our society, but that's not why we're here today. What happened here was so systematic that the judge said it was so questionable, I don't know if we can even rely on other FBI affidavits. And that indicates that there might have been some kind of imputation of some kind of criminal mens rea requirement. I don't want to get into that right now because I want to ask another question. But I think that maybe you should, I would hope that you've really considered whether there was criminal culpability on the part of these people who misled the court and spied and resulted in spying on American citizens without, in my opinion, real probable cause to do so. So one of the things that you talked about is your reforms is to have the field office involved when you're bringing something into the home office to investigate. The problem that I see with that is that you're asking effectively a subordinate to go to have input that might be counter to their superior, somebody who actually has basically some impact, some on their career even. So this becomes problematic. I'd like you to address that in a second, but I would just give you my example. I mean, I was a trial lawyer myself on both sides, prosecuting and defending. I did international law for a while. When I went back to get a graduate degree, I can tell you this, even with my experience, I was wary to cross the professor because I knew they had control over my grades. They had control over whether I would be able to finish my degree in the time I wanted to get my degree finished. So I would suggest to you that maybe that might not be a reform that actually is more than cosmetic in nature. And I'd like you to address that, please.
So I certainly understand the concern and the dynamic that you're describing. What I would say is this. The changes that I put in place there have a few different dimensions. One, and this was not made clear before, so this is something that we did, my leadership team and I, that differs from the past. We made it explicit that other than in the rarest of circumstances, all investigations should be conducted in the field. You might think that should be obvious, but that wasn't articulated clearly. We articulated clearly. Second, we built in place the check and balance concept that I described in response to some of the earlier questions. I get your point about subordinate superior, but I think what we were trying to do was ensure that in that case, the deputy director would have the input of the field office leadership. What I did not want to do, since this would be a policy that would govern us, going forward in every possible situation, is prevent ever, under any circumstances whatsoever, investigation being conducted out of headquarters. I don't think something that absolute is wise for me to tie the FBI director's hands in that regard. I'll give you an example. One of the black eyes of the FBI in the past was, of course, the Hansen matter. Now, that kind of investigation wasn't conducted out of headquarters. It was an unusual situation, incredibly important, incredibly delicate for reasons that I'm sure you can imagine. That was appropriate that be conducted out of headquarters. In many ways, the Pent Bomb investigation, the 9/11 related investigation, that was in many ways run out of headquarters. And I had a front row seat to that as I was in the department's leadership under President Bush and Attorney General Ashcroft at the time. So there are rare circumstances where it does make sense to have an investigation run out of headquarters. But what needed to be clear was everybody needs to understand that has to be kind of the black swan, the unusual situation. And the steps that we put in place and the corrective action that you're referring to was our effort to try to make sure that people understood it couldn't just become a practice, that you had to jump through those hoops, and hopefully it will accomplish that.
Well, Director, I would hope that you would...
The gentleman's time has expired.
I would hope that you would go on with regard to the reform, the superior
The
civil.
time has expired.
issue that
The
we
gentleman
talked
from
about.
Maryland is recognized.
Thanks, Director.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Wray, I'm still not clear of your response to questions asked by both Mr. Nadler and Mr. Radcliffe. Is it your testimony that there was no political bias in the decisions and actions that affected the so-called Crossfire Hurricane investigation?
My testimony is that the Inspector General made a number of very specific findings on the question of political bias, both about what he found and what he didn't find, and we accept that in full.
I'm asking, after 2.5 years heading the FBI, what is your judgment? Was there political bias involved with this investigation?
My judgment is the same as the Inspector General's.
Same answer to the midterm exam investigation?
Oh, you got the prior investigation, the mid. I haven't gone back and re-reviewed that one. But again, we accepted all the findings of the Inspector General.
Let me ask you this question, Mr. Wray. Greg Jarrett, the journalist, wrote a book, actually a series of books, on the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. And in his latest book, he describes it as the story of ambitious and unscrupulous people in high positions of government who abused their authority. They sought to subvert the rule of law and undermine the democratic process. They weaponized their powers to influence the presidential election, undo the result they did not like, and extrude the elected president from office. Our intelligence community and the FBI were at the heart of this illicit and unprecedented scheme. As director of the FBI, what's your response to that observation?
My response is that the conduct described in the Inspector General's report is unacceptable.
You say unacceptable.
And that it's unrepresentative of the FBI that I see every day working there as director.
And let me ask you, who's been fired as a result of the Inspector General's report?
Well, most of the people involved in the investigation that's featured in the Inspector General report.
Who has been fired?
Well, there are a few people who are no longer with the FBI. Some of them have been terminated. Some of them left on their own.
Let me ask you
Some
this.
of them have sued me.
Who's been disciplined? Who's been disciplined?
Like I said, there have been a number of people who have been terminated from the FBI. Some of them have sued me.
Terminated or allowed to resign?
Well, in some cases, terminated.
Yeah, you use the word unacceptable. I would think you would find a stronger word for that over what has happened by the actions of people who sullied the reputations of every decent person at the FBI and disgraced the agency that you now head. You know, the FBI is entrusted with the most terrifying powers that we can give our government, the power to ruin people's lives, to invade their privacy, to launch pre-dawn raids on their homes, to bankrupt them with legal costs, to deprive them of their liberty. We entrust you and your agency with these powers to protect our liberty and to protect our safety. And when those powers are abused in the manner that we saw in this whole Russian collusion hoax, that's a direct threat to our freedom and to the credibility of your agency. And I'm terribly disappointed that you cannot summon the outrage to put it in stronger words than just this is unacceptable and doesn't represent the FBI. Unfortunately, at the moment, it does represent the FBI, or at least the leadership of the FBI that committed these abuses. You were appointed to clean things up. And I'm just, after reading the IG's report and the Strzok and Page emails and the actions of Bruce and Nellie Orr and McCabe and Comey, frankly, Mr. Director, I don't trust your agency anymore. And that's a profound thing for me to say because I was raised to revere the FBI. I sat glued to the television every week when Efrem Zimbalist Jr. came on and exemplified everything that was great and holy about our government. And I think that you have lost the trust of an awful lot of Americans, and that's a dangerous, dangerous thing for an agency that A, is entrusted with these powers, and B, is entrusted with these powers to specifically protect our lives and liberty. And I don't see how you can restore public trust without a thorough and complete and public house cleaning, and without at least a clear and unambiguous expression of moral outrage. You know, unacceptable actions against those in our agency, or I should say unmistakable actions against those in the agency that abuse these powers. Let me just ask one final question. Looking at the treatment of Michael Flynn by your agency, why would anyone in his right mind want to talk to an FBI agent knowing that there could be a hidden agenda to catch them up on a factual detail and then prosecute them for lying?
Well, Mr. Flynn's case is a subject to ongoing litigation, so I'm not going to talk about his particular case. I will tell you that I'm sorry to hear the views that you express. I will also tell you that having been to, I'm sorry, may I answer?
Yeah.
May I answer? Having been to every field office of the FBI, having talked to law enforcement in every state in the country, having engaged with every headquarters division, having engaged with partners, private sector, public sector, foreign, state, local, intelligence community, I can tell you that the FBI that I see every day is the kind of FBI that you described having reverence for. And I hope that we can restore your confidence in that FBI. I would say to you also that I am not somebody, as is quite clear by now to lots of people, who expresses himself with hyperbole and loud rhetoric. I am somebody who reflects his views through action. And we have taken, I implemented the day the Inspector General's report came out, over 40 deep corrective actions that deal with that series of failures and problems. I have communicated over and over and over again my expectation of what I think the FBI employees should do, and that, frankly, is what I do see from the FBI employees day in, day out, all over the country and, frankly, all over the world. Now, where there are people who need to be held accountable, we have a disciplinary process for that. For the current employees, the vast majority of the people involved in the conduct that you're describing are no longer with the FBI, so they're not subject to our disciplinary process in the first place. But there is, of course, as you know, the ongoing John Durham investigation, which we've been cooperating with fully, as the Attorney General himself has said. So I look forward to hopefully having another hearing with you at some point where we can have a very different kind of exchange about the FBI.
I would very much look forward to that.
The gentleman's time has expired. The committee will stand in recess until 12:45, but we'd ask that people stay seated until the director is able to make his way out of the room.
What is being done to secure the 2020 election? And you said, Director, back in December that Russia represents the most significant threat to the election cycle itself. My first question, is that still your assessment?
Yes, it is.
There are two different ways you can lie to an agent. Neither one of them usually works out for the criminal defendant, and that is either by an affirmative lie or an omission lie. And there are real serious consequences to that, whether it's an obstruction charge or perjury charge, or oftentimes it's as simple as adding another 6 or 7 years onto your sentence. And the FBI is very, very good at those things. And I've heard you talk today. I mean, we've read the Inspector General's report, and I think it's important to take both of those reports that were given, both the midterm report and the final report. And some of those things are concerning enough with the gross negligence, incompetence, and the things that have been said. And I'm appreciative of the 40 corrective measures, and we've talked about improving the process, rigor, accountability, tone at the top. You've said the conduct was unacceptable. How we do what we do matters. Process matters, process and policy changes. But I have one of the things that I have a little concern with, actually a significant concern with, is when you take all of those institutional mistakes, or however you want to frame them, in those two reports. Typically, when you have that kind of systemic breakdown or those types of issues, mistakes fall randomly across the process. And that didn't happen here. You will be hard-pressed for you to point out a mistake that was made that wasn't either against President Trump or, in some cases, the benefit to candidate Clinton. Throughout the entire report, there is not a real randomization of those mistakes. And that's what I'm concerned about. And what I'm concerned about is this wasn't just a failure of process. This was a failure of people. And I'm not going to ask you to go back because I would like to, but I think I know what my answers are going to be. So when we're talking about these 40 corrective actions and the things that we are doing, moving forward in any case as we continue to go forward, how are the penalties being imposed? Because you can have 250 institutional safeguards, but if there isn't real consequences to those safeguards, then we don't have a real solution to the problem. Because I don't want to talk about political bias. I mean, I would prefer to have a hearing for 3 days on it. But for the purposes of this question, I don't care what the motivations were. I just know that people either by omission or by intention lied to a court on a sworn document that if that would happen to any other citizen, they would be charged with a crime. And while there are plenty of reasons to allow people to resign quietly, there are reasons to have people have internal disciplinary actions in their files. When you're dealing with a secret court and secret warrants and in probably the most politically charged case that court has ever happened, it's important that those institutional safeguards exist. It's important for a guy like me to think, because if they didn't exist there, I don't know what's happening in the other cases as well. So I'm glad you're putting these resources in place. I am glad you are putting all of these procedural safeguards in place, but I would like to have a conversation about what are the consequences for those not happening.
So we have a fairly robust disciplinary arm, our Office of Professional Responsibility, which I think in general is viewed within the government, the broader U.S. government, as one of the premier independent disciplinary arms in any executive agency. And that is the arm through which we apply discipline in response to misconduct or, in some cases, poor job performance even. And the penalties range from across.
I want to stop there. Poor job performance, I'm not getting into that. Quite frankly, I can't imagine managing 37,000 people. But when I'm talking about misconduct, I just hope we're holding ourselves accountable to the same thing we're holding other people accountable for.
Well, I can assure you, without getting into specific examples, that I can think of just during my time as director where I have seen conduct that our people have been disciplined for that no one else in the government would have been disciplined for. So I think we hold ourselves to an even higher standard, and there's no one who deplores falling short of that standard more than I do.
And I'll just end with this quickly, and I hope that's the case, because it sure seems like when we get into these situations, somebody looking at it from the other side, that we allow people to resign quietly or move into different areas, and then we come to hearings and we say we can't talk about internal disciplinary proceedings. When I think you're going to ask us a lot of things coming up. We have the FISA reauth coming. We are going to continue to have conversations about facial recognition. We are talking about encryption as it goes. And one of the things we have to do is not only know that we have the procedural safeguards, but that people are doing this will be held accountable, whether that's internally, externally, or even in a court of law.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Lesko?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director, for being here. First, I'm going to say a short statement, and then I'm going to ask you a question about leaks. I guess the statement is, I remember watching the media, you know, and they're talking about the deep state and everything, and I thought, well, certainly they're exaggerating, you know. And, you know, people back in my district would talk about the deep state. And again, I listened, but I thought, well, you know, it must be a bit of an exaggeration. And then I remember President Trump talking about how he thought he was being spied on. And a lot of the media was like, oh, gosh, he's just, you know, full of it, basically, paraphrasing. And then we get this Inspector General report. And boy, I'm starting to think some of these people are onto something. And, you know, there was abuses, as you've said. It was inappropriate. You don't want that to happen. But I just want you to know that the people in my district, a lot of people just have totally lost confidence. Unfortunately, in the process, and they're afraid that they're going to be targeted, or political people. I mean, when you combine that with the IRS going after Tea Party groups, people are really questioning this whole thing. And so I hope that as you investigate what exactly happened, or you discipline people on if they had FISA court abuse cases, that maybe you make it public so people really believe that you're doing something about this. Next, my question is about leaks. And geez, this place seems like a sieve. I mean, leaks all the time. And so I wanted to know what role the FBI has in people leaking classified information, and what you're doing about it.
So first let me say I despise leaks, and I have a long list which would use up all of your time and mine to go through about why they're so harmful. But what I will say is that some of the things that I've done since becoming director are the following. One, I put in place a new media policy for all of our employees, and then everybody was required to be trained on it, which make for anything that might come out of the FBI, at least, to make it excruciatingly clear what people's obligations are and what the prohibitions are about engaging with the news media. And the reason that having that kind of strict, clear policy is so important is because then if somebody slips up, or worse, there's no ambiguity about what the rules were. And then that's why we trained them on them. Second, I created a dedicated leak investigation unit within the counterintelligence division because a lot of the leak investigations that are conducted government-wide, we do on behalf of the government. So if somebody leaks, and we've had a number of significant investigations that led to indictments of people in other agencies where they leaked, and specifically leaks of classified information. There are other violations that could occur, grand jury information, Title III information, things like that. But when it comes to leaking classified information, for example, we really have to be aggressive with it, and we've tried to be. And then last but not least, where there have been provable leak violations by any of our own people, we've imposed discipline, and there have been some people who've been terminated for violating the media policy.
Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Was the dossier Russian disinformation?
I don't know that I would try to characterize the dossier sitting here right now. I would refer back to the Inspector General's report and the Special Counsel's report.
When Dr. Fiona Hill testified as part of the impeachment proceedings, she indicated that she thought Christopher Steele was played by the Russians.
I haven't looked closely at the testimony you're describing.
But it sort of raises an important issue. If that took place, which Dr. Hill at the NSC seemed to think did, then the FBI used Russian disinformation as a basis to get a warrant to then spy on American citizens. That is a big concern.
Russian disinformation is a major concern for us.
That's why I brought
24/7.
You brought that up earlier in the hearing. Yeah.
And we investigated aggressively.
Yeah, but we talk about election interference, Russian disinformation, but it may have been used in that way. That's the one thing that seems like a lot of people don't want to talk about. Certainly folks on the other side don't want to talk about it. But that may have been the biggest Russian disinformation used in the 2016 election was when Christopher Steele got played by the Russians and the document he produced was taken to the court to get the warrant to spy on a person associated with the presidential campaign.
I understand your concerns. I'm just not going to add anything beyond what's in the Inspector General's report and the Special Counsel's report on the question of the dossier.
Gentleman's time has expired.
About the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force and the threat by foreign governments to our elections. There's been extensive reporting by the Department of Justice about attempts to sow discord in the 2016 elections in Pennsylvania. That included social media efforts, organizing rallies to support one candidate who happens to be President Trump, and weaponizing social media with what's been termed a sweeping and systematic attempt to undermine the election.
Thank you, Director, for being here today. The chairman started out the hearing by talking about Russian influence in the 2016 election. When we had Bob Mueller before this committee, I asked him specifically, when he was sitting in that chair before this committee, did they have any evidence that a single person actually changed their vote due to Russian interference in the 2016 election? He testified under oath that that wasn't under his purview and that somebody else or another group or other investigators were investigating that. Can you confirm that that is being investigated or that's not being investigated within the FBI, whether somebody actually changed their votes due to Russian interference in the 2016 election? Mr. Mueller had stated that that wasn't within his purview, but somebody else was investigating it.
Right. Well, I think to the extent that we have ongoing investigations into Russian malign foreign influence efforts, it is conceivable that that kind of investigation would detect if somebody had changed their vote. But I don't know that I would describe us as conducting an investigation into individual voters' decisions.
So there's no evidence then before this committee or the American people that a single American voter changed their vote due to ads that Russia was putting on Facebook or Russian interference in the 2016 election?
I'm not aware of any intelligence community assessment or investigation specifically into, beyond what's already been done and reported on about the 2016 presidential election.
Okay, let's move to the Horowitz report. The FBI's decision to defensively brief then candidate Hillary Clinton, but failure to brief then candidate Donald Trump is a blatant example of the FBI's disparate treatment of the two campaigns and clear bias. There's a reason the IG stated the FBI, quote, fell far short of the scrupulous accuracy that is required. On that note, there were clear issues with the Carter Page FISA application. 51 factual assertions related to the application and renewals either did not have supporting documentation, or the supporting document didn't state the fact, or the supporting document showed the factual assertion is inaccurate. There were 17 separate inaccuracies or wrongful omissions in the 4 FISA applications, including 7 repeated in all and 10 that did not occur in the original application but occurred in 3 renewal applications. The FBI omitted evidence cutting against probable cause. For example, Carter Page stating that he had nothing to do with Paul Manafort, and George Papadopoulos denials that the Trump campaign was collaborating with Russia or WikiLeaks or otherwise involved in the DNC server hack. Additionally, the FBI failed to disclose Bruce Orr's information that Steele's reporting was going directly to the Clinton campaign. The FBI overstated Christopher Steele's previous work with the FBI. The FBI was less than fully candid about Christopher Steele sharing information leading to Yahoo's September 2016 article. The FBI did not disclose the lack of reliability of Steele's subsource. FBI personnel apparently avoided using the Woods file re-verification system for FISA applications. The FBI knew Carter Page was a U.S. intelligence asset who had assisted in cases involving Russian intelligence, but hid that fact from DOJ during development of the FISA application. So my question to you is, and I think a lot of the American people would like to know the answer to this question, are all the individuals and agents and supervisors that were involved in all of these abuses that I just annotated that were in this Horowitz report, are all of them no longer working at the FBI? Have they resigned or fired or been removed from their position?
At the more senior levels of the FBI, the people involved, I think in every respect that I can think of, are gone from the FBI. And of course, there is an ongoing investigation by Mr. Durham with which we're actively cooperating and fully cooperating, I might add. As to the current employees, there are more, what I would call more line-level employees who were involved in some of the events in the report. All of those employees, anybody who still remains at the FBI, and again, they tend to be more line-level people, were referred to our Office of Professional Responsibility, which is our disciplinary arm, which is the standard process. After there's been fact-binding by the Inspector General, and the facts go to our disciplinary arm, and by longstanding process, that's how we handle discipline about those people. We have erred on the side of inclusion when we did that. So what I mean by that is there are some people in the report who are literally named like once or twice, and it's not really clear they're even named in a way that's problematic. But we've gone ahead and just figured better safe than sorry, and we've sent all those names to the Office of Professional Responsibility. We will follow that process, and I have made very clear that if that process results in recommendations of discipline, then we're going to impose discipline, and we're going to hold people accountable.
Just a quick follow-up, if I could, Mr. Chairman. What's the time frame on that?
I can't give you a projected time frame exactly. It may depend. It's probably not all going to happen at one time. Some people will take longer than others.
Thank you.
The IG report uncovered that the FBI fell far short of the scrupulous accuracy that's required for FISA applications while surveilling Carter Page. Ironically, FISA's original purpose was in large part intended to respond to unchecked surveillance abuses by the federal government. As the FBI moves forward with implementing the corrective actions that you've laid out in light of the IG report's findings, it's imperative that the Bureau continues to work towards regaining the full faith and trust of the American public. Now, 3 FISA amendments are scheduled to sunset in March, And as this committee, which is the committee with jurisdiction over these, over FISA, considers reauthorization, it's paramount that we ensure that American civil liberties and due process are no way inhibited.
I want to affirmatively distance myself from some of the disparaging comments that I heard right here today that I really do not understand. They are extraordinarily misplaced, and they are shameful.
What we heard in 2016 is that we got confirmation that Russia interfered in our elections. You actually stated just in an interview in December of 2019 that Russia represents the most significant threat to the election cycle itself. The Mueller report and our entire intelligence community also agreed that Russia targeted to help then candidate President Trump now. So we know now that they're trying to do it again in 2020. So I wanted to just point out a couple of examples of what we saw here in 2016. The post on the left was highlighted by the House Intelligence Committee. It's an ad paid by the Russians promoting then candidate Trump in Florida. This is the type of propaganda that was spread in 2016 and that we're actually still seeing today. And I'm just very concerned that if we're not careful in managing the disinformation of campaigns and social media, it will once again be a powerful tool for Russia or any other actors.
I would defer to my friend and colleague from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Director, I want to go back to where my colleague from Florida, Democrat colleague, was just at, talking about Russian election interference. We had a brief exchange on this a few minutes ago. But again, Dr. Hill talked about the dossier. She said that it was a rabbit hole during her testimony in the open hearing in front of the Intel Committee. She said it was a rabbit hole and that she thought Christopher Steele got played. And yet that very document that Mr. Steele put together by talking to Russians was taken to the court to get a warrant to spy on a presidential campaign, specifically the Trump campaign. So that means one of two things had to have happened. Either the FBI got played or the people in charge of that investigation at the headquarters knew about the dossier and yet used it anyway. Their bias was that strong. And it seems to me, in light of all that, the real question is, and you referenced this, and I think in your opening statements, Director, the real question is, what are we going to do now? We got 5 weeks till a major reauthorization takes place. So what are the specific things we can do now to address what took place? The FBI got a document that was from Russians that was not true and yet used that to go spy on a presidential campaign. So what recommendation? Let me run through a list, and you can tell me if you like some of these ideas. Would you recommend to the FISA court that there be a citizen advocate at the court when an American citizen's rights are going to be infringed on?
I think that's a change that we would have to think very, very carefully about, lest it have all kinds of unintended consequences.
Would you be in favor of a transcript of every FISA hearing being kept by the court, and secondarily, that transcript then being sent to the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee for their review and only that committee's review?
That starts to involve the manner in which the court conducts its proceedings, so I'd have to think about that a little bit more.
How about some type of appeal process? Any type of appeal process that you would favor?
Well, there is, under the current FISA system, from the FISC, the FISA court at the lower level, there's the so-called FISC-R, or FISC Court of Review. So there is an appellate court, and there have been, in extraordinary circumstances, appeals to the FISA Court of Review.
How about a hearing whenever there is a renewal of a FISA warrant, that there actually be a hearing? You can't just look at the paper and say, okay, we're gonna continue the FISA warrant. Of course, the example is Mr. Page, Carter Page. They got the initial warrant and then it was renewed 3 times. So how about during those renewal process or those renewals that it's an actual hearing every single time?
Well, I think the court has the discretion to have hearings whenever it thinks it's appropriate. And the thing I would say, whenever we talk about anything with FISA, when you use phrases like every single time, is that it's important for the American people to understand, and for this committee to understand, that the vast majority of the FISAs that we do, that both the initial applications and the renewals, are the kinds of applications that I am quite confident, we don't know each other, but I'm quite confident you wouldn't lose any sleep over, and we really wouldn't want to grind things to a halt on that front.
I'm not disputing that, Director, but we do have a 400-page report, and we know what took place in the context of 2016, 2017, relative to Carter Page, who was part of a presidential campaign. And some of the things that were spelled out in this report, my guess is probably have never happened in American history. So that's our concern, and we hear so much about Russian interference in our election, which is true. It happened. We all know it did, and we don't want it to stop. But it seems to me a big part of that Russian election interference was the idea that a document that Russians put to, information came from Russians that Christopher Steele put together was used in this way, I think is scary. How about?
Can I just on that point, because I think just to make sure we're not talking past each other unintentionally, when it comes to the origins of the investigation, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, I think the Attorney General has said publicly, so I think that's why I'm on solid ground to say it here, that one of the things that Mr. Durham is looking very specifically at is the origination of the investigation.
We appreciate that.
And we have been cooperating fully with that investigation, as the Attorney General himself has commented publicly on a number of occasions. So there's that. The other thing I would say to you, which might go a little bit to the issue you're raising, is that as the Attorney General recently mentioned in a press conference, he and I are putting in place mechanisms where investigations of the sort that was at issue in the Crossfire Hurricane context would have to get approved both by the Director and by the Attorney General.
Important point. Do you?
The time of the gentleman has expired.